So today's virtual workshop focuses on equipping educators with tools to promote inclusion for latently diverse students. Today's facilitators include Allison Godwin, Bree Benedict, Joanna Malo, Jackie Rohde, Heather Perkins, and Ronnie Clements. So if you guys are ready, I will turn over the screen to you and say welcome. Glad you're here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Allie. We're really excited to be here. I'm just going to share our screen with you, and we're going to also drop a link to our Google Slides in the chat. We'll be using those throughout the workshop to take some notes and engage with you. And we want you to have them available to you if you want to download them or take them with you when you go. So I'm Allison Godwin. I am excited to talk to you about some of the results from my NSF Career Award and bring in some of the voices from my team as well. Our goal today is to start a process of helping you think about student narratives and the student experience in engineering education, particularly latent diverse students. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by that. So just a brief agenda. We're going to give you a brief introduction to the project to get you situated on some of the terminology we're using, where the data came from, those kinds of things. And then we really want to get into breakout rooms as quickly as possible to make this interactive and have you actually engage with some of our data to draw your own insights and conclusions. And then to take those insights and conclusions that we generated as a group and then think about change strategies that you might take with you, short-term wins that you can do when maybe you start teaching in the fall, or if you're teaching a summer course, or if you're engaging with other students and faculty and professionals, as well as things that might be more long-term change strategies as well. So we're going to invite you to explore how the multiple dimensions of latent diversity shape identity and inclusion and those implications for engineering education efforts. And we have kind of three main goals for what we hope you get out of this today. One is to define and understand why latent diversity matters. The next is to identify institutional structures that can support or constrain students' identity trajectories, and then create and implement some bite-sized strategies to promote inclusion in engineering education. So I'll tell you a little bit about the project and what I mean when I say some of those terms. So we started from the premise, and I think many of us are here because we all kind of see this, is that engineering culture shapes what it means to be an engineer. It shapes that identity and whether students can see that as a part of who they are or not. A simple Google search of the term engineer brings up images like this. There have been some changes in these types of images over the years. We see more women represented in these pictures, including non-white women here in these pictures. But at the same time, there's a pretty limited set of what people are doing. There's white and yellow hard hats, lots of construction safety vests, plans, but really that stereotypical image of an engineer that our society holds, and often students who are coming into engineering hold, don't really explain the full range of the things and types of work they engage in, as well as who is present in our engineering education systems. And so, I pull from some of the literature to talk about what do we mean by engineering culture? Well, engineering culture has been described as a culture of suffering and shared hardship, often associated with high levels of stress and low student well-being. There's a lot of really great work that's coming out in this space from researchers like Kelly Cross and Karen Jensen in this work. And students even talk about engineering, well, it's for anyone, but not everyone. And then they often list a long list of prerequisites and expectations that you have to be an engineer, often associated with smartness or elitism. And engineering education and culture has often been discussed as valuing limited ways of being, thinking, and knowing that alienates individuals who are bringing alternative cultural norms, alternative value systems, alternative ways of thinking and engineering. And those limited ways of being, thinking, and knowing are often shaped by the history of engineering as being white and masculine and heteronormative and other pieces of that system that we've continued to have over the years. So we started with that premise and said, well, if students are entering into this culture, how are they being shaped by it? And what does that mean for students who come in with different ways of being, thinking, and knowing than what the system values? So we said, let's think about that as terms of what we're calling latent diversity. And that's shaped and informed by students' backgrounds and prior experiences. And we define that as students' underlying attitudes, beliefs, and mindsets that they bring with them that you may or may not be able to see, and that you may or may not be valued or supported in engineering. And we really want to center this as an asset-based approach, that these students have valuable things that they're bringing, and it may just be they're not being recognized, and that it's person-centered, that these are unique to the individual. And so when we think about topics like justice and equity and diversity and inclusion, often a traditional approach is to first look at subgroups, look at women, to look at Black women, to look at first-generation college students, and then to understand differences in those groups, in their experiences, in their engagement with engineering, and their outcomes and other things. And I think those results are really important and have built a basis from which we've drawn on that we can learn more about how better to support those students. But at times, right, that may also essentialize students to that group by which they're being identified. And so what we thought about in this approach was, what if we first understood the range of characteristics and diversities that students were bringing, and then next understood how that was informed by their background experiences, kind of just taking a different approach to starting to tackle some of the really sticky and challenging issues in diversity, equity, inclusion, and engineering education. So we started by doing a large national survey across the US. Close to 3,700 students responded to this from first-year engineering programs. And we did some data analysis techniques to look at interrelationships within the data across various attitudes, beliefs, and mindsets that students held. And we found 6 different data progressions. There's a lot that we have out on this, but what I think I want to emphasize mostly from these images is that we have a large kind of normative group of students that have very similar attitudes. In this image, it's group A. And then we have students who have really different attitudes, beliefs, and mindsets that they're bringing with them. And we see valid differences across these groups when we start to unpack them and poke at them. And what we did was we took these groups that we discovered through this large national survey, and we sampled students out of these groups who provided an email address in order to talk to them over a period of 3.5 years to understand their stories in engineering and how those incoming attitudes, beliefs, and mindsets that we measured on that survey were being shaped by that engineering culture. And so we use identity trajectory theory to think about how who they are is being shaped by engineering and how they're seeing themselves as engineers over time. And this, I think, is really helpful in thinking about this as 3 interrelated strands, which we've pictured here. An intellectual strand of how students are developing or drawing on and effectively learning about engineering in ways that other people acknowledge, notice, and recognize. An institutional strand of how they're engaging with institutional structures, student organizations, support programs, resources, their roles and responsibilities within the institution itself, and how that impacts their pathways and seeing themselves like an engineer. And then their networking strand, or their relationships, both with peers and faculty and other people around the university that contribute to their professional identity as engineers and their long-term abilities to succeed. And so we started to talk to students and gather their stories and then analyze them along these 3 different the 3 different interrelated strands. And so what we're going to do today is actually have you engage with some of those narratives. I think narratives are really powerful because they tell stories, and those kind of richly convey individuals' experiences. But I want to make a note before we dive into actually engaging with these data, is that when we did our sampling for our large survey and then for our interviews, we really focused on this concept of latent diversity and getting a maximum variation in that set of underlying attitudes, beliefs, and mindsets. But our sample is from a wide range of institutions across the US, but it's also predominantly white men. And that reflects the cultural norms in engineering and the representation that we've historically seen, around 20% women and much higher levels of white students in those populations. And so we didn't intentionally oversample by minoritized groups in engineering. And so we have fewer students of those representations and backgrounds in our data. And so we have, when we did our interviews and tried to sample that, we tried to maximize that diversity, but at the same time, we want to acknowledge that we can provide some limited perspectives in these longitudinal interviews, particularly around race and ethnicity. and particularly for Black students in our study. And so we want to really be careful about the claims we make about the representativeness of these data and what they mean for understanding inclusion in engineering education, because they may not include particular aspects of student groups and student stories. So I'm going to turn it over to Ronnie, and he's going to introduce some of our student narratives as well as, or sorry, I'm going to turn it over to Bree, apologize. She's going to introduce you to some of the student narratives before we get you into the breakout.
Thank you, Dr. Godwin. As stated previously, we've interviewed a total of 25 students over the past 3 years. We've maintained communication with 3 students who decided to pursue alternative academic disciplines such as secondary science education, health data science, and business. However, for today's activities, we plan to delve into the narratives of 3 engineering students who decided to stay in engineering. We intentionally decided to select students from varying TDA progressions, institutions, and trajectories. Before we move into our first breakout activity, I would like to introduce you to 3 students, Anna, John, and Tchuck. Anna is an electrical engineering student at a large Northeastern institution. Anna's incoming attitudes and beliefs align with individuals characterized as Group A. Individuals in Group A are generally motivated by intrinsic and extrinsic factors, strong interest in mathematics, and strong beliefs about their abilities to understand and do well in physics. These students also indicated moderately high responses of belonging broadly in engineering and in the engineering classroom. Over the past few years, Anna has been passionate about learning engineering and engaged in several co-ops. However, towards the end of year 3, she began to slightly disengage from school. We can go to John. John is a mechanical engineering student at a medium Midwestern institution. John's incoming attitudes and beliefs align with individuals in 2 groups, E and D. Individuals in Group E have moderately low beliefs about their STEM role identities, intrinsic motivation beliefs, and high neuroticism. These students were more confident in their ability to understand engineering and mathematics concepts than physics concepts. Students in both groups E and D had low emotional stability and may sense stressors more keenly than their peers. Over the past few years, John has consistently described the role of mental health on his experience as an engineering student, and that's something that you can really see in this quote that we pulled from round 1 interview. And we can move on to Tchuck. Tchuck is a biomedical engineering student at a medium Northeastern institution. Tchuck's incoming attitudes and beliefs align with individuals characterized as Group B, and individuals in Group B have strong motivation to perform to be perceived by the instructor as a good student, feel recognized as an engineer by their instructors, peers, or family, and express interest in learning engineering. These students also indicated moderate responses of belonging in engineering and in engineering classrooms. And over the past few years, Tchuck has engaged in undergraduate research and has been extremely vocal about his interactions with faculty. Now we're going to move into breakout 1 with Ronnie.
Thanks, Bree. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. Here in a moment, we're going to ask you to read some pieces of the student narratives that we've collected from the 3 students introduced to you. And we ask that you look for stories of inclusion and exclusion in 4 different areas. The 4 areas are faculty interactions, peer interactions, classroom and curricula, and the last is both co-curricular support and institutional policies, practices, and procedures. In the faculty interactions group, we invite you to discuss the direct and indirect interaction with faculty that were a part of the student stories, both inside and outside of the classroom, which also includes the students' perceptions of faculty that they shared with us during the interviews. In the peer interactions group, we invite you to discuss elements of the student stories that include interacting with peers in their field, whether in academic, non-academic, or co-curricular spaces. In the classroom and curricula group, we invite you to discuss the classroom experiences, procedures, and teaching methods that influence the students' stories and shape their experiences. In the last breakout group, we invite you to discuss both institutional and co-curricular systems, opportunities, and procedures that influence student stories. In just a moment, we'll open these breakout rooms and you'll be able to select the group of your choice. If the groups become too large, we will split into multiple rooms of the same topic so everybody can have a chance to speak. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. The student narratives we would like you to use are located on our website, which is listed here. I think we'll have somebody post the link in the chat. The website is currently under development, but will soon include all the narrative data from our study and will provide a great place for future or current faculty and students to read the stories of our group of students as they progress through their degrees. Can we go ahead and switch to the website? This link will take you directly to the story collections page where you can read more about our students, which I think is the page right before this one. And where we are going to ask you to kind of navigate to is the bottom. So there are some tags listed here. Above that a little bit, there are some gray tags listed there that have some included of the groups that we want you to break into. So the faculty interactions, peer interactions, classroom and curricula, and some other tags as well. And if you could go ahead and click one of those tabs, any one of the tags is fine. And so if you'll note, these excerpts are taken directly from student narratives that span multiple years, 3.5 at this point, and multiple interviews. As narratives rarely, as narrative interviews rarely result in cohesive storied events, our interviews included several instances of redundancy, as well as jumps in times and setting, as students kind of tried to recall their experiences. And so to present our narratives in a cohesive manner that was more easily understandable and easier to read, each participant's interview was smoothed and constructed into 2 to 5 page restored case narratives. The quotes that you're seeing here are actually excerpts from those case narratives, so we don't have the full case narratives listed. And we kind of tried to place everything in a chronological sequence. Any italicized words that you see are words that the researcher put in to kind of smooth over the section to make it more readable. So you'll have roughly 25 minutes for each breakout session. Once you're in these breakout groups, take about 10 minutes to explore the website, click on some tags that are related to your topic area and read them and kind of, generate some questions or some discussion points that you want to bring up with your group. And after the breakout, we will ask you to report your group's discussion, and you can have a discussion after those 10 minutes of kind of looking through some of the quotes for about 15-ish minutes. And so these are some of the reflection questions to get you started with discussion. We'll also post these in the chat. So whenever we leave this bigger group, you'll be able to remember what the discussion questions were. And so, yeah, to remind you once again, the 4 different groups that we're going to have rooms for are faculty interactions, peer interactions, classroom and curricula, and institutional and co-curricular systems, opportunities, and procedures. Also, I think I was supposed to mention that we're going to post a link to the document in the chat, and you can click that. And if one of you or 2 of you can post some notes on those slides, that would be great for the report out, so we can all see some of your notes as well.
With that, we're going to invite you to actually join a breakout group of your interest and get started in exploring some of these narratives. And if you need, you should be able to go down to the bottom of your screen and click a join breakout room, and they'll have the 4 different options listed there for you.
Bree, I might be responsible for launching these rooms. We're not seeing them as participants, and I cut out, I'm no longer a host.
Okay, give me a second, because I actually had it launched, so.
What is the total time in the breakout rooms?
It'll be 25 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna close the room and maybe, oh, okay, you should be able to do it now. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm not able to see a breakout room. I don't know why, but maybe that's not,
Okay.
I'm wondering if that's why a couple of people are left here too.
Mm.
This is Kathy. I can't see joint breakout rooms either. I'm trying to work off my phone and I just might be.
Okay, I'm putting you in a
Okay.
group. I'm just gonna put you in a group.
Can you put me in curricular and curriculum? And
Let me move you there.
it doesn't matter.
Okay. Okay. You should be able to go now. Heather, what group were you in? You didn't have a specific group?
I
Okay.
think I was supposed to float
Oh, okay.
butterfly, I guess.
Okay, cool beans.
What do you think about the size of these groups? It looks like faculty interaction and peer interactions are pretty big, but
This is Kathy. I seem to still be in the main room.
Okay. It
Do I
says
do
you
that?
haven't joined.
Let's see.
I put you in
Ah,
co-curricular.
okay. Let me try again. Sorry.
You're fine. Um, so it's not even, but I feel like it's enough people to generate something, unless you
Yeah.
want me to move people.
No, I think we're okay. It looks like there's enough in each. It just, I think there's the biggest group's 9 people. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah. All right. I'm going to peer interactions. Heather, I think we're supposed to be in peer interactions. Our name is under it. I'm leaving.
Okay, I'll go over there.
I'm gonna hang out here in case stuff comes up and people need directions.
Okay.
Probably could pause the recording. I guess they'll edit it out.
I felt that way too.
It's always like one of these things where it's just like active learning, where you like plan something, like, now go do the thing. I hope this goes well.
It's so true. And no matter how much we do this interacting virtually, it still is going to have those things because live interactions always had that ambiguity or wiggle. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel a little maxed out sometimes when troubleshooting, but
I hear that. Yeah. Well, they should have plenty to like sort through. They probably have more than they have time for, but I'd rather have that kind of exploratory options than not enough.
I think so.
Yeah. And hopefully this is interesting to folks. I always find stories valuable, and it's pretty rare that you just get access to like the whole data set basically. So we were hoping this would be something of value for the community, but you never know, right?
I think even just going off of my own interpretation from this first 30 minutes, I'm really excited. I'm excited about your project and I eagerly want to know more. So
Awesome.
access to the website. As much as I know Bree, I had no idea you had these. I had no idea that this was going on. So I think that's great. And I also appreciate an exercise where you get to engage with that.
Yeah, the stories website has been this like thing we're like, we know we need to do this. We know we need to create this. We know we need to get on it. And it's been really the focus over the last year is like, we just got to get it up there and get it out there. And it's still in progress to finish it, but a lot of the tagging's been done and will be finished by the end of the summer. And our next goal is to try to both put resources on there for students and faculty, like both of those sets of like quick tip resources. And then I need to finish an IRB application so that we could actually collect additional stories that people want to share through the website, and a process of actually sharing continuing stories. So that's like the other thing. Yeah, so
Yeah, it's so fun that, I mean, because that's the point of it, right? Is that we will, collecting them is a good start, but really interacting and engaging with that is the ultimate goal. Well, an ultimate goal along the steps to ultimate goals.
Right. Yeah. Back. So hopefully you had some generative discussions in your groups and could start to get a peek of, even just with 3 students, narratives and the information that they had there, various insights that you could glean about what caused inclusion, exclusion, what had impacts on students' trajectories and pathways. We asked for a brief report out from our groups. If a representative would be willing to give kind of a couple of key insights about some of your discussion points for everyone else who didn't have a chance to investigate the data in the way that you did, that would be really helpful. We start with the faculty interactions group.
So hi, this is Chris Swan. I was in this faculty interactions group. Number of statements were actually made, but the 2 points are just listed here. The comment on the first one, and I really invite others in the group to actually comment on it on these points. There was a clear indication from the students' responses about how the teachers' attitudes and approach in teaching impacted whether they felt comfortable with the material, and if that influenced their interactions, and maybe not even just current interaction, but also future interactions and beliefs about the instructors. And so that came through. You would see a lot more instances of negative or positive responses coming from these students, that was more indicated on the faculty's not technical as much as non-technical ways in which they interacted with the students. And again, it could be positive or negative that they were feeling. Another observation that was put in was about how the students would sort of, if you will, leverage their feelings towards the instructor by how they felt about their comprehension of the material. If the material was difficult to understand in a rather quick pace, basically in class, then they had less favoritism towards that instructor. But if they were able to really understand the material, they would feel a lot better about that instructor.
Thanks for sharing. Breakout peer interactions group. Someone be willing to jump in there.
Sure, I'll hop in for team peer interactions. I think 2 main themes that came out of what we were discussing is, of course, the transition from pre-COVID to post-COVID, just in terms of how that often bottlenecked or constrained students' just ability to interact with their peers, their willingness to interact with their peers, and that several of the students had reported having their peer groups as really important support networks, and then losing that support network, outside of purely academic matters, was really a struggle for them. Once they lost the regular and consistent peer interactions that they had pre-COVID. A conversation that was coming up at the end of our was really interesting was of some of what John had described with feeling sort of a lack of belonging, not really feeling like he was measuring up to his peer group, and that sort of, in spite of the fact that he seems to be a really talented and really interested artist, and we were just having a discussion about how people have all these other abilities outside of the traditionally valued technical content that really has a lot of importance in engineering as a holistic discipline, not just a purely technical one. And that was basically where we ran out of time, but that would be a really, I think, fun discussion to follow further.
Thank you, Tim, Sharon. Classroom and curricula, folks. Someone be willing to share?
Hi, I'm Anuja, and I'm going to report on classroom and curricula. So we discussed about if the students might feel included or excluded, and what is the thing that makes them feel included. And one of the things that was more clear was that if we when there's a survey gone out, or someone comes into the classroom and asks the students what is it about this course that you like or don't like, then and then goes back, so students are like to tell that. And if the instructor incorporates that and listens to the feedback, then they feel very included. At the same time, when nothing gets done, then students repeatedly said, well, we felt excluded. What is the point in me even saying something? So that was one big thing. It was the student felt included when they were given freedom in projects. So they were given some freedom to choose, maybe giving them some projects to do or something like that, or how they would be assessed or any of that. So that freedom was something that they really liked. They liked it when professors were very specific in their instructions, when they understood what they're supposed to do. And the communication, lack of communication rather, was a big issue when they felt excluded. And there was another thing for exclusion was when there is lack of respect for students outside of engineering. So it's often seen in engineering where other areas of engineering, other areas of the school are taken not seriously, and that led to feelings of exclusion among some students as well, who are in engineering as well. If there was too much curriculum, so some faculty feel like we need to teach everything about a course, and so that's kind of makes students feel lost. They don't know what is going on. So when students feel like they are learning and they're getting it, then they feel included. But when there's too much curriculum, they're always feeling lost, and that's how they feel excluded. If the faculty have a more narrow focus, then the students might feel left out, and a more broader course usually makes students feel included. Then there was a lot more about communication, and then the students need to know what is expected of them. So that part needs to be very clear in a class, otherwise they feel excluded. And then there was the last thing we talked about was what was the impact of these experiences. When the students felt they were they were listened to, they felt they belong there. When the students felt that they felt excluded, it impacted their success. They felt they weren't succeeding. They didn't feel like they could connect with people, and maybe these kind of students just like they couldn't find a community. So it was all connected through how they felt they were succeeding, and so that was what we talked about.
Thanks so much, Ninja. And last but not least, our co-curricular support and institutional practices and procedures.
I can go ahead and report out for that group. So good afternoon, everyone. In our group, we talked a little bit about students wanting to be well-rounded and seeking other areas of support in that co-curricular support. We talked quite a bit about John doing the summer camp and finding other opportunities to be recognized, because he had to take courses multiple times and may not have been finding that support within academia, looking for other opportunities where they felt like an engineer and where they could showcase and refine some of their skills. When we switched over to the institutional policies, practices, and procedures, something that, or maybe it's still co-curricular support, but something that came up in the discussion was the connection between like family pressure of being a legacy student, having a parent or grandparent that was an engineer, saying, you know, you have to be an engineer, it's has money, it's lucrative, and their idea of what engineering is versus the social capital they provide by having that experience in engineering, and how those two may either work to support or undercut the student may be interesting. And that mainly came from Tchuck and Anna's narratives. And so I think that was the main thing. Anyone else is welcome to jump in from the group if there was something I missed.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek. So hopefully you started to glean some really valuable insights from reading student stories, and hopefully even see the power of the narratives and stories and understanding various aspects of students' experiences. We could have probably given you all afternoon to explore just these 3 students, and we have many more students in our data set. But we wanted to just give you a little bit of a flavor and a taste of the data and maybe some of the insights you might get out of this. We're going to move on to our next portion of our workshop and talk about, now that we've talked about student experiences, what kind of change can we make in engineering education based on what we know?
Yeah, so I'll be taking over for this section. Yeah, so hopefully the breakout groups gave you some ideas for changes you'd like to see, or reaffirmed your commitment to making changes that you already had in mind. So to build on these ideas, our goal is to give a very high overview about the theory of change, some considerations to make when planning changes, and some prompts to help you implement your change strategy. We will spend less than 10 minutes on the lecture part, but then get back into the breakout groups to discuss. So to start, we wanted to give you a minute or two to use a piece of paper or a side document to jot down some ideas that you'd be interested in making, with the goal of improving engineering education to be more inclusive. So these could be changes in your teaching practice, in your approach to your research, or in your broader institutional context. And while you're ideating, try and think about different kinds of change. So there are some ideas that you'd be able to implement on Monday or when the semester starts. And there are other changes that would take some years to develop. So try and write down at least like one short-term change that you'd like to see and one long-term change. And as you listen to the next couple slides, come back to these ideas and add notes to flesh them out further for discussion. So I'll give you a minute or two to find a piece of paper if you need to. Okay, let's get on to the next slide and get started. So some of you might be aware of some like the academic work around theories of change. A lot of it comes from like organizational management. We're going to do a lightning round of 3 prominent change theories, plus 2 other kind of ways of thinking about changes at a high level that may be more familiar to people who are engineering educators. So we can talk about the first change theory, unfreezing, changing, refreezing, developed by Kurt Lewin. The basic idea is that there are forces that drive change to happen and forces that work against change. So in this model, implementing change involves intentionally disrupting the patterns that make people hold on to the status quo, and then finding ways to make change the new normal. So as you think about your ideas for change, what are some of the forces that are working with you? And what are some of the forces that are working against you? Many of you might be familiar with the idea of early adopters or late adopters. Personally, I'm one of like the last people to get the next generation of phones. So for technology, I am a hardcore late adopter. And so innovation diffusion theory is a concept that's generalized, that there are always going to be people that need different amounts of time and exposure to be comfortable making a change. And so in the context of inclusive practices, you may feel like you're on the forefront of adopters in your department. And so then part of implementing change is figuring out how to work with the people that you have and how to let change take its time. You can also think about identifying your fellow early adopters that can support the changes that you want to make. And then our last major change theory is the Cotter 8-stage model. And it focuses a lot, if you look into it, on kind of like relation building and how to mobilize other people. And so it takes a business management perspective, which may not always translate that well into academia, but it's still a useful reflection point for thinking about like the relationships that you need to develop to make change when it's beyond just your own practice, and how you can get genuine support for your idea from the people around you. And so if you want to get your colleagues on board with an idea, then looking into this theory may be beneficial for you. And so then the last two in this table, we're talking about ways of framing change that may be more familiar to academics. So many of you are probably familiar with the concept of scholarship and teaching and learning. And so part of this scholarship of teaching and learning entails making intentional evidence-based changes in the classroom and then reflecting and documenting on how those changes went. And kind of the idea is to iterate as you go semester to semester. So you can think about how you can incorporate the changes you have into the regular improvements that you make in the course semester to semester. And then finally, we can be super engineers about this and think about change in terms of quality assurance. So quality assurance means identifying key quality criteria and having really good measurements of those criteria and understanding how to control for variation in them. And so similarly, in engineering education, we can think about the importance of what we measure and how we measure it. We can also think about how measurements can capture or maybe not capture the impact that a change has. Because when we're talking about something like culture, what data are we going to use to figure out if we've been successful or not? So yeah, just some kind of theories of change, very much surface level, but hopefully some prompts to get started. And then there's some additional reflection opportunities when thinking about like your personal change strategy. We talked already about how changes can operate on different timescales. We can also think about the scope of different changes. So sometimes you might be the only person involved in a change. Sometimes you have to get a class of students who you can basically tell what to do. You have to get them on board. And sometimes you have to work with very opinionated colleagues. So the scope of a change can affect how you decide to implement your change. Also think about the ways that different forms of power might influence your change strategy. So take a moment to reflect on the level of influence you have right now and the extent to which you can use that influence in various areas. And you can think about in terms of power and just in terms of who you have connected with you, who can you count on as an advocate? And how can you reflect a team of change makers who are committed to inclusivity? So by now, hopefully you are ready to get back into breakout groups again to discuss each of your ideas. If you're still feeling a little stuck or a little lost, on this slide, we've provided some starting ideas and resources that you can come back to. So in faculty interactions, there's some recent dissertation work out there about a culture of care in engineering education. And by the way, all of the Google Drive link at the bottom has a lot of these paper citations if you don't have institutional access to any of them. So feel free to look into that. And then for peer interactions, you might want to think about the concept of psychological safety and how people may or may not feel comfortable working in teams. For classroom and curricula, there's a really great reflection document from Tufts about reflective teaching practices. And at an institutional co-curricular support level, you can think about maybe finding one person with influence that you can convince to get on board with your plan. There are also some slides, some resources at the bottom of the slide for further reading. So yeah, thanks for listening. We had a little lecture, and now we're ready for breakout group 2, where Joanna will give the instructions for that.
Thank you, Jackie. So now that everybody listen to Jackie and the awesome ideas that she put together, it's time to get started for our discussion. So our idea is to invite you to go back to the same breakout rooms because we already discussed some of your readings, and then take about 15 minutes to reflect on those breakout questions that we have below and discuss in your group. So what you want you to think about is exactly what Jackie was talking about. What short-term wins for creating an inclusive engineering education experience? So what can you change today? Well, today's Friday. I don't think nobody wants to change at 3:14 in the afternoon, at least in the Eastern Coast. But on Monday, what can you do? What can you think about it? Or what would you focus on the longer term? What can you start working today that maybe in the fall semester you can do and make it perpetual again? So again, we are going to take notes in the same slides, and then we are going to ask you to report out. So if everybody is ready, just please join the breakout room. Thank you.
That's all right. Got folks coming back. I know our time is short. One of the community guidelines is non-closure. We're not going to get to the end of this or solve everything by the end of our session, but hopefully you've got some things to start thinking about and to start working on. We have a very brief time, so if we could get short report outs from each of our groups, we'd love that. And then we're going to leave you with just like a teaser or a preview of where this is going next. Our faculty interactions group. So.
I'll go ahead and summarize for the group. I think one that we talked about was potentially sort of modeling for students and how to get them to understand a little bit about interacting with students, whether that's, going to office hours to have that relationship, or being able to ask questions in class, or is there a part of that that's on students, and maybe trying to model that, especially in introductory levels, about how they can interact with faculty. And then for the sort of on the other end, we talked about a lot of things, but talking about sort of on the faculty sort of perspectives of faculty. And so that's one is just trying to maintain sort of a positiveness about the class, even when they're sort of getting down, understanding where the students are at, trying to have the faculty understand where the students are at so they can have that sort of empathy of that. And then how to do that, whether it is some kind of a training or discussion faculty to faculty. There was some suggestion that it seemed like team teaching seemed, at least in the early years, that was practiced by Lisa, seemed to be really helpful for some of this, but how well that would translate to upper level or different classes or things like that, not sure. And then a lot of it was part of the difficulty is time for faculty to be able to invest in some of these changes, because some of these changes in terms of understanding students, getting to know the students, even just taking time to relax yourself so that we can have, like a positive attitude going in and we're not stressed out about sort of everything else in our lives, is difficult because of all the other demands on our time as we are going through. So.
Thanks for sharing, Noah. Next up, our peer interactions group.
I can go. So one of the main takeaways from the students was the importance of casual interactions. And so we were thinking of ways that could promote it short-term and long-term beyond just projects, because that's kind of a low-hanging fruit thing and it's such a small group. So short-term things we were thinking of, mandatory study sessions, like a SI program is pretty popular at a lot of schools, or mandatory, not mandatory, but allowing easy access to peers for study type sessions where you don't need to come in with a pre-built group of peers to work with in the library. So it makes it more accessible. And I know some schools have it where it's mandatory for a class where you have to go. So it also provides smaller groups of people to interact with, which is a lot smaller than a class of 100. On more longer term scales, we were thinking things like cohort models would be helpful. So that would involve more institutional change for those to be effective, but those would also allow you to get to know, or not you, but students to know their peers, learn who their peers are, and be able to form those more casual relationships that will help them in their classrooms as well. So we were thinking of ideas that went beyond just projects.
Thanks, Kelsey. Classroom and curricula.
I can talk about that. So we were talking about short term and long term, and some of the things that we thought about was standard based grading. So students have an opportunity to demonstrate how they what they learned using in multiple times and in different ways, as well as they know exactly what their objectives are and what the learning objectives are and how they're connected. Then they should be able to communicate well, because we figured from the first breakout room that communication is really important for students to feel connected and included. So making sure our communication is more clear. Um, we were also thinking that students come in with different knowledge about the prerequisite. So probably creating a couple of weeks of prerequisite material a couple of weeks before class, so that students hopefully will study that. Whoever needs it has access to that curriculum. Then identify different ways to stay on task during the class, and so so that the students are prepared for class. We also talked about how faculty might be really busy, and so they don't know might not have time to figure out inclusive teaching practices. So some of the learning support staff would provide support to the faculty to help them to first of all educate the faculty that you should be you're using inclusive teaching strategies, and also the rest of us who are here. So this would be more of a long term, that we should go and share with our colleagues what we learned here, and try to educate them what we learned here. Then we decided to stop jokes about other majors. Most of us were guilty of doing some of that, and think of it as a class as a whole, not in pieces, so that we connect the whole class as a whole, and then the students get that too. We should try to think about what we can do as faculty, instead of what the students should do. Like students don't care, or so stop thinking about it that way and think about what we can do instead of what students can do. And I guess that was about it.
Thanks so much, Anuja. And last but not least, again, our co-curricular support institutional practices, policies, and procedures.
I can go ahead and jump in here. So we talked about a lot of different things at an institutional level, but also at a personal level, discussing, how to balance short-term and long-term ideas as well. And so we definitely emphasize the importance of engaging in co-curriculars as faculty or graduate students. So, either being a support to undergraduate institutions or finding programs, or finding your own groups to be a part of and to support. And also just encouraging students in your classes. This is something you can do on Monday to, look for co-curriculars that they can be a part of, that can help them round out their experience as an engineer, but also help them find ways to express their creativity. Also, we talked about how a lot of these experiences that students are having in these co-curricular activities should honestly just be part of some of the programs. They should, these are things that a lot of people find to be necessary. So why don't we, embed them within the programs to make them more accessible? Also utilizing the Career Center or other institutional supports to help students see the value of these co-curricular opportunities and how to, frame them as really beneficial on their CVs and their resumes as they go out for different opportunities, either in academia or in the workplace. Promoting financial transparency, so how much money the institution is giving these groups to help these group presidents not to feel like they're having to manage the weight of this all by themselves, but are able to go and find support to help them kind of move the group in the direction they need to. Making it easier for students to engage by providing food, or making it during times in the day where there's no classes going on, but not 7 in the morning, things like that. changing the language we use to describe these groups and who is welcome. So emphasizing that all identities are welcome. Somebody in our group brought up a great example of, a lot of groups have, either women in engineering or other groups that are specifically targeted to support a specific group, but that doesn't mean you can't be an ally if you don't hold that identity. So, opening the way that we describe our groups to include the most people as possible. And also using service learning and embedding some of these co-curricular opportunities in community, and emphasizing how engineering can support community can open the doors for a lot of different people who may not see engineering as a service-oriented field to find a place to really support their community. And also in a very long-term space, advocating for more curricular flexibility at an ABET level. So instead of kind of trying to force students into this 4-year model where if you miss a class, you're behind a year, and then you're feeling all this kind of lack of belongingness as your peers kind of advance and you feel like you're a failure. But instead, explaining that this can be a 5-year, 6-year process, or even 7-year if you need it, and kind of providing an institutional support for students to be able to do that.
Thanks, Ronnie. So I'm going to turn over to Heather for some next steps and just say thank you for being here. Thank you for starting to think about this with us. The work's not done yet, but it's a starting point to think about how we can learn from students and their experiences over time and their stories, and impact what we do, both personally and more broadly as an engineering education community.
Hi, everyone. I will talk very quickly since I know we're short on time, but one of our main next steps is putting together this website, which we hope will be a resource for students and for faculty. And so what I wanted to do was invite you to share any feedback that you had today from using the website, or just ideas, and that was the wrong information to paste into the chat. Here's the right one. So we have a contact form on the website. And so if you had any sort of feedback, maybe if something didn't work for you on the website, or ideas, please let me know through that or through any other way. What we're hoping to do for instructors in particular is to have a section of the site that will synthesize some of our findings and present it in a very accessible way, some of the different sort of change strategies that we talked about here. And so we would really appreciate your feedback, since we hope that this is a tool that you will be able to use. And then I think that was all that we had planned to talk about in our next steps. And so we wanted to say thank you to everybody. And I don't know if Allison wants to take back over for this one.
No, I think that's all we had today. Thanks for sticking around, folks, for the extra time. I think the conversation was helpful and generative. Bree or Allie, is there anything you want to say?
So the reminder is we have, it looks like 2 feedback surveys. One is the post-workshop survey that Emily posted. This is for our Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion workshop team. And then then there's the other post for this specific team's feedback on the website and that information that they're asking from us. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our facilitators for presenting your information and work here. And we hope to see you at the conference coming up, and as well as in future virtual workshops.